I want to talk about the implications of a strategy which the United States military has quite evidently been planning to carry out in recent years. This is the strategy of domestically invading the U.S. empire, of using the vast powers of the U.S. Army to try to retain control over lands within U.S. borders in the event of a catastrophic destabilizing event like a series of vast hurricanes or a breakdown long term of much of the U.S. power grid or things of that nature. It's evident that this strategy is in the works because of a series of reports that the Pentagon and the U.S. Army War College have put out in recent years. The first one I'm talking about is the U.S. Army War College report from 2016, which says the Army will need to prepare for what it calls contemporary Stalingrads, scenarios where the Army feels the need to invade and occupy large urban areas, including in what the report names to be a number of U.S. cities. This vague and probably growing desire within the military to carry out the U.S. war tactics abroad at home is also reflected in a 2016 Pentagon training video, which states that these Army actors, what it implies to be special operations forces, will need to drain the swamp, as it says. This is further reflected in a 2019 Pentagon report, which outlines a near future where the Army will need to get ever more involved within U.S. borders to try to quell the destabilization, which will inevitably, as it says, result from climatic disasters and from things like the inevitable pandemics of the near future and from the breakdown of the national power grid, which it says is largely unprepared to handle the climatic disasters of the coming decades. Long story short, the U.S. military acknowledges that great instability is coming and it sees domestic military intervention as the only way to deal with this so that the government, the current government at least, can retain control over the lands that it now has control over. The thing about this approach is that the more you think about it, the more risk it has of igniting what I think is the worst case scenario for the United States government, which is a scenario where the population feels the need to respond to an extreme provocation on the part of its current government. See, the thing about the anti-colonial proletarian revolution that the people in my political camp hope to materialize on this continent is until the masses are on board with the idea of fighting against the state, of trying to take territory away from the United States government, before the masses are on board with our radical solution, we're not going to practically be able to do this. We'll continue to be isolated in our efforts and will lack the mass backing to retain and gain land from the U.S. government. But this could, I think, easily change if the U.S. military employs the kinds of tactics which it's been talking about in these reports. Tactics where, as the 2016 U.S. Army War College report indicates, the Army is going to bring Israeli-style, brutal, repressive tactics to our neighborhoods. And this is an outcome the Army is describing where everything that Washington does to places like Iraq, Libya, Syria are going to be done to the American people. Well, I don't know about everything, at least not at first, because as indicated by the 2016 Pentagon training video, the Army is eager to start out with more mild, isolated operations, like using special operations forces. But truthfully, as as this training video does not acknowledge, truthfully, special ops would not be enough to put down a hypothetical urban uprising in megacities. Realistically, the Army, if it wants to retain control over these areas, if it wants to win these hypothetical battles with rebel insurgents, it's going to have to employ really deadly, very drastic tactics. It's going to have to really bring America's wars home. It's going to have to do things like bombing city blocks, which it actually did in 1985 in Philadelphia to suppress a black liberation group. These are the kinds of extreme, horrific tactics that the U.S. Army will realistically need to employ if it wants to put down an uprising throughout the U.S., at least the kind of uprising that the Army seems to fear will materialize. And if the Army starts doing this kind of stuff, if it starts committing war crimes against its own people, the people are going to get outraged. They're going to feel the need to mobilize. I mean, look what's happened in this last year when George Floyd was murdered. There has been a mass mobilization of a perhaps unprecedented level in the context of the United States. Imagine the kind of galvanization of the working class, of the poor, that will occur if the U.S. Army replicates what it did in Philadelphia in 1985. And imagine what will happen if it replicates that on a far larger scale, as it might feel the need to do if rebellion becomes severe enough, if class tensions become severe enough, if instability as a result of climatic disasters becomes severe enough. This is the recklessness that the Army is hoping to avoid, but that it will probably ultimately carry out to perhaps its own detriment, and perhaps even to the effect that the United States won't be able to exist in the long term. When you escalate things this much, you're going to get blowback.